Okay, so welcome everyone to this video. I am super excited. My name is Hilary Cobb, and I am a doctoral candidate as well as an assistant professor in Tennessee. And so today we're talking about research. And so I wanted to invite my amazing colleague, Aliesha Clark, almost Dr. Aliesha Clark, who's also a doctoral candidate, to talk a little bit about research, her research specifically, and kind of the larger picture of research when it comes to cultural competence. So, Aliesha, the first thing I wanted to ask, a lot of times we're in my class right now, we're talking about literature reviews and crafting a research question. And how do you kind of get from that initial, like, wow, I'm interested in this, to an actual tangible research question? So would you tell me a little bit about the process of that? Where did you start? How did you go through the lit review? And what did you end up landing on as your question?
So for me, actually, what I ended up with is like not what I started with at all.
Okay.
So even when I came into the program, like my thing was mental health literacy in the Black community and minority communities. Because where I come from, what I noticed is anything, mental health is a buzzword. Any type of mental health diagnosis is a buzzword. Diagnosis is a buzzword. And I'm like, no, we need to know about this so we can address it. Because I worked in Military University, I worked with the teens, the incoming students for many years. And a lot of them ended up dropping out of school in their first year and a half. And a lot of it had to do with mental health stuff that they had no idea even was a thing.
Or they
So
knew
that,
the buzzword, but they didn't know what the buzzwords meant.
yeah, or they didn't want to use the buzzword. It's kind of like, I'm feeling like this all the time. And I'm like, maybe we want to, how about you go talk to someone in the counseling center about that? Or how about we talk a couple times and then see what resources we have, that kind of thing. So that's where I started. And then as I was going through research and stuff, I was kind of like, I don't know if this is where I want to be. I'm not sure. I wasn't sure of the direction. I was just kind of like, I feel like this is too broad. I don't know. And what I ended up doing is scheduling a meeting with the librarian. So for me, typically, I'm such an independent student that I never use the resources that the university has. I'm
Right.
like, I've had research courses before. I can do this myself, whatever. But I did schedule a meeting with her, and when I tell you, it's like my brain took a deep sigh. It was amazing. So she's like, "What are you interested?" She's really talking to me about me, and how this research can be mine. And she's like, "It sounds a lot like." You keep mentioning your son and the different things you want him to. It sounds you really want to lean towards like motherhood. And I'm like, yes, I
Right.
do. And somehow, like, as we poked around together on the different databases and on Google Scholar and stuff, it turned into what my research question is now. And I'm like, what the heck, this is not where I started.
But I love that because I think, one thing we talk about in the book, and I've talked about in my class, is that often it is the topic you're interested in, whether it has personal meaning for you based on your own experiences,
Yep.
or, it's something that you see in your community, you see this hole or this gap. And so
Yep.
it's not like you just randomly put your finger somewhere and you're like, oh, yeah, I'm interested in that one thing. It has to have that deep kind of level of resonating with you. Now, when you
Mm-hmm.
did, so obviously, as part of our program, we did a literature review. My students are doing one for this semester. When you did your literature review, like, did you find a lot of research about it? Because like for mine, like there was a lot of research about the topic, but not with community college students. So I just went a specific population. When you were doing the lit review, like what kind of stuff did you find or not find?
Oh, this is a really good one. So typically with your literature review, you kind of want it to be like a funnel. So a funnel starts very wide and you get down to the more specific stuff. So my research question is around parenting and basically what the content and the context of Black parenting or minority parenting and how that's different from our counterparts. So first I just went parenting. I just researched parenting. And what I found was a lot of research from white researchers, um, and a lot of it kind of was outdated. So there was like nothing in the 2000s. Like it was extremely outdated about parenting. And then what I did find about Black parenting was quantitative research, and and it was only like a low income population, small numbers, and nobody got to talk about their parenting. The people who they researched didn't get to speak. So I didn't really find much about Black parenting at all. So then I kind of went into like child welfare and like religion and that kind of thing to see like, okay, let's get into the child systems. What are they saying about this? Oh, well, there's large numbers of Black kids in these systems,
Right.
but they don't have a grasp on the parenting. So how are they being taken away from their parents if we're not understanding the parenting style? What is going on? So I was seeing all of these gaps when I was doing my lit review, and I'm talking to my chair, and I'm like, listen, I am afraid to make statements in here because there's not the research to back it up. What
Right.
am I going to do? So as I'm going through the lit review process, I'm writing what I'm seeing, and I'm talking about sort of addressing the gaps, not making the bold statements of what it should be there, but saying, there's a dearth here. What is going on? And then that's how the lit review cultivated.
I love it. And we talked a lot on the first week. We talked about the different types of studies. There's exploratory and explanatory. And I think yours was very much like an exploratory study in that, like you said, there wasn't a ton of research. And I remember, I don't remember what class it was in, but you said something that really, you said several things that really deeply resonated with me during this program. But one thing that you really resonated with me is I think you said something along the lines of like, all the research you were finding, like you said, was low income, and it was typically like child welfare and kind of like, I think you mentioned something like a lot of the research really looked at kind of this deficit of, parents getting their children removed and child abuse and all this stuff. And I think you said something like, but there wasn't a lot of research sharing the voices, the strengths, the positive perspectives of people in that community. It was all very niche in the research. And I thought that was so powerful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what you find is what I did. I did qualitative research. The title of my dissertation is A Megaphone for Black Mothers, obviously because I want to give this population a voice, right? So I'm doing qualitative, I'm doing interviews. This method is allowing them to use their own words to describe their experiences. And what I found is the research that we have does not have that.
Mm-mm.
And then they're not including the people that they're talking about in their research. Quantitative doesn't get that. You're getting numbers, you might get some like multiple choice, that kind of thing, but you're not getting a robust, detailed, authentic, cultural response when you're doing this research. And that's a huge part of cultural competence,
Yeah.
right? And so if you have your white researcher talking about Black culture who is not from the Black culture, is not talking to people of the Black culture, it's kind of like, how can you have an accurate depiction of my culture and why we do what we do, how we do it, and if you're interpreting it correctly, that kind of thing. So this method absolutely gives a voice to, but it adds richness because it lets them use their own terms.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that because I think quantitatively, and that's maybe why a lot of it has been looking at like frequencies of, or
Right.
proportions of child and care, or frequencies, number of times parents go to a parenting class, but it's not really capturing the voice of the issue. And okay, so we talked about your research question, looking at parenting practices in the Black community, why you chose qualitative, which I love to hear that kind of robust the voices. And I do know even in my field, like online education, there's been a movement as well to like qualitative from students. What are students feeling? Qualitative research from faculty, like what is online teaching like for them? And there's been kind of this push to do qualitative as well, because yeah, numbers can only go so far. The other area that I would love for you to talk about is just cultural competence, right? That's what we're learning about in this class, and kind of all the different facets of it, right? Understanding different levels, different religions, nonverbal cues, verbal cues, what does that look like? And how do we really build trust, right? Because the students have looked at the research timeline, and we know that we have a long history of doing really, really unethical things in the name of research. And so I would love to hear maybe from your own research or some things to share. How do students build that cultural competence, or what are some things that they can be aware of?
One is when you're engaging in, I guess any type of socialization with someone of a different culture or background is to treat them like a person.
Yes.
we, we totally like overthink that, and it's so simple just to treat someone like a person. When I speak to the mothers involved in my research, and even for one of my electives, I did like some practice interviews and things like that. At the end, they're just like, thank you for talking to me. Like, thank you for listening. Thank you for allowing me to tell my story. And thank you for asking questions. Now, granted, obviously, I'm asking questions because it is an interview, but they feel valued and they feel heard and those kind of things. And so, one thing that's really important first is to acknowledge first who you are. Mm-hmm. So, my obviously I am Black, but I am also a mother, and so my population, I identify with my population.
Yes.
So I have to address like where I come from, my experiences, whether that's with work or how I was raised, or the the area I was raised in. Like I was not initially raised in a low income community. I came from one of two Black people in a Christian school. I lived in a super rural area. And then at some point I moved into a low income area. And then I went to like a Black school where it was kind of like, everybody looks like me. It's like, whoa. But you really want to be extremely self-aware, but you want to be mindful too. And so part of cultural competence is exploring the person or the people group that you're interacting with, or that you are researching, or that you're wondering about, and just keeping that at the forefront. Yeah, and it's a process. It's not a one-time thing where it's kind of like, I know who I am, I'm learning about who you are. No, it's like, I'm learning who I am, I'm learning about you, I'm addressing some of the assumptions that I have, some of these feelings. Why am I feeling this way about this? Or maybe you have some different stigmas in your mind that you didn't realize was a stigma until you're talking to someone of a different culture, and you're like, oh shoot, like I've been assuming this on you for so long, and this is not the truth.
Right.
But to have rich interactions and rich research, you have to keep that process going over and over.
Yeah, I love that. And I have a video that I've shown in other classes where it talks about like, we also have to be careful that sometimes we might say, well, I'm a, this is like you said, like you're Black and your mom, but you have a varied background, right? In experiences. And so you can connect with other moms who are also Black and moms, but they might have they may grow up in, an upper class urban city, and you might have another mama who grew, like you said, in a rural and a different experience. And so the video that I talked about is like, sometimes we come in and we're like, oh, I look like you, or I have the same experiences as you, so we must have the same like thoughts or beliefs. Yeah. You have to like step back. So I love that idea of like, you have to be like acutely aware and like reflecting on yourself about what assumptions maybe do I bring because we look the same, or because we have similar experiences that could bias it, and we talk a lot about bias in this class because that's what we have. It's what we bring. Okay. Do you have any other thoughts or anything? Because I love that. I love that. Any other thoughts about cultural competence or things to be aware of?
Yeah, one last thing. I'm not sure if you mentioned it while we were on here, if this was like our pre-discussion. But when you are engaging in cultural competence, or, with someone of a different background, or, whatever, is to, and this is so social work 101, is maintain that strengths-based perspective. Yes. But when you're hearing about these things, like, and doing that process of understanding, okay, this is me, this is why I'm feeling this, look for the strengths in difference. There's so much strength in difference. And I didn't really I guess grasp that or capture that fully until I was doing the research. And I'm like, wow, like white parenting and Black parenting is very different. It is very different. My chair is white. I have a committee member who's Dominican. I have a committee member from Africa. And she's like, my children didn't grow up with racism because it wasn't until I came to America that I knew that I was even Black. I didn't even know that, that was a thing. But what I found is there's so much strength in being different. And then the research reflects like, okay, we may parent differently, But why? It's because we're adaptive. We're adapted to the things, our experiences. We're growing. We're learning. We're learning how to navigate these different things and how can we make that better for our children, that kind of thing. So when you are doing your research or interacting with others, keep that strengths-based perspective. I'm like, wow, okay, your culture does things this way, but it's because of this, and this is great. Why?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
We often say, like, especially when I worked in child welfare, like, just because people do it differently doesn't mean it's wrong. And I think a lot of times we make these assumptions of, like, the way I parent versus the way you parent, one of us are right and wrong. We get this very like black and white thing, which is so wild because
Yeah.
everybody has strengths and maybe some areas of growth and improvement. I don't know about you, but as a mama, there is always
Oh yeah.
room for me to grow.
Always. Yes.
Yeah, but I think, and I was even thinking about research questions too. A lot of times we come in with this like negative question in our head, like, here's the problem. Why is this a problem? How do we fix it? Instead of looking, like you said, and saying, like, what are the strengths of this community? Or I love that. Oh, wow, this illustrates adaptation, which is a huge thing to be able to adapt to an environment and all of that. And so I love that even keeping that strengths is important because so often when we're doing that lit review, we start looking for the holes. Like, what is the problem with this? Not, is this working or what is strengths? And I do feel like qualitative research lends itself really well to the strengths, right? Like, it's hard with my quantitative, like, strengths don't always come through as clearly, but I think you'll be able to identify just strength-based language, all that stuff that your moms bring, which is lovely. So again, like a major, I'm not a huge qualitative researcher, but the more we've gone through this process, I see how valuable it is.
Yeah, it's amazing.
That's awesome. Okay, so before we wrap this up, thank you. You're amazing. What do you have anything else that you'd like to share about either your research, the process, something just for students? I've got some really awesome students that are soaking this all up. Any thoughts or advice for them?
One is to use your resources. That's number one. When I went through the master's program, I didn't really use my resources, but now in the doctoral program, I'm like, this could have been so much easier if I would, use my resources, but it could have also helped me with some thought processes. You think when I thought librarian, I thought, okay, she's just going to send me some articles or whatever. But no, she helped me with some processing and to get where I needed to be. So use your resources and don't be afraid to ask people questions. Like even when I was like trying to figure out like my research questions and stuff, I would be having like general conversations sometimes with people not included in my study, but it was kind of like, you're bringing up such good points. Maybe I should include that in my research, like kind of tucked in the back of my head, made a little note in my phone. But don't be afraid to talk about a little bit, just kind of explore outside of the textbook and outside of the classroom.
Yeah, I love that advice. I know that I did that with a lot of people that weren't even part of like my university. It was just like
Right.
randomly talking, and the people say, "What are you looking at?" And I'd be like, "Oh my gosh, this topic." And yeah, people would have lots of thoughts, and I'd be like, "Ooh, I'm gonna tuck that in the back of my mind." And so our students, like at least for one of the lit reviews, are looking at things like social work and burnout and secondary traumatic stress. And I think you can talk to anybody about that. They may not be a social worker, but you may talk to a teacher and it's like, oh, I'm feeling burned out. And I feel like during COVID, all of a sudden this research started about like, oh, teachers can have compassion fatigue too. And a bunch of research started, I think, because people talk to teachers and they're like, hey, it's not
Yeah.
just social workers and counselors that experience this. So I think that value, like you said, in asking questions, talking to people, you get so much information that you're like, oh, I didn't even think about that. So that's
Yeah.
awesome. Well, thank you so much, Aliesha. I love it. I'm so appreciative of your willingness to talk, and just your research is exciting. I think it's going to go, and it fills such a hole that is so very needed in our social work education in general and the community. So awesome. Thank you so much.